Testing, testing. Any better now? Well, the lapel mic's not on yet, but the other one is. Oh, hold on. There we go. I got it now. Once again, I don't know how to turn things on. Okay. That's 2 weeks in a row. It's not a good look for me. Okay. Well, you may be smelling our all-natural incense, potpourri, what do we want to call that? Whatever this skunk is. Thankfully, Scott is down here early to be airing things out for us, so that'll work. Okay, so we are in 2 Samuel 16. And we looked at the first little bit of this chapter when Ziba comes to meet David. Remember, the big theme of this section is loyalty. You know, who is still loyal to David, who is going to switch loyalties over to Absalom, and how can David tell the difference? Is anyone going to remain loyal to David at all? He's not completely sure in this, but there are a few people that he has sent back to Jerusalem on his behalf. We talked about that at the end of chapter 15, Zadok and Abiathar and Hushai to kind of be spies and see if they can undermine Absalom in any way. But now Ziba has come. Ziba was the servant of the house of Saul, who's now the servant of Mephibosheth. And when David had given Mephibosheth all the remaining lands and properties of Saul, then Ziba was the one who was going to care for them for him. But now Ziba has taken this opportunity to reveal, and it's probably a lie, but to reveal that Mephibosheth is actually going to take advantage of this opportunity to see if he can become king. Maybe the chaos of the moment will give him this opportunity. We noted that here in this chapter, Ziba just makes the assertion and David believes him, gives everything to Ziba instead of Mephibosheth. If David ever regains power and is able to make good on that, then Ziba will have those lands. But then in chapter 19, Mephibosheth will get to make his case and say that Ziba deceived him. You can make up your mind as to who you believe there. For my part, it's easier to believe Mephibosheth than Ziba. And easier to understand how Mephibosheth would remain loyal to David since David had been so kind to him, to see Ziba as the, kind of trying to climb the ladder, taking advantage of this opportunity, but also that David might not have been able to tell the difference because he's in this state where he doesn't know who's loyal to him. That's an understandable position to be in at this point. Okay, so that brings us back to verse 5. And let's read the first little bit here. 2 Samuel 16, verse 5. When King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, and as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said, as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. So who is Shimei, and why does he curse David here? Gary.
Well, it seems like he was part of the family of Saul.
Yeah.
Which, that's an interesting dynamic where family members can be prejudiced really for each other. It's a mixed blessing. You get a lot of support in the family, and you can kind of be darkened
Yeah, that's a good point, that family often has this intense loyalty for each other, and that's not altogether a bad thing, but it can blind us. It can cause us to not see the faults of the people that we are close to, of the people we're related to, and also to maybe give them too much credit that they shouldn't have. Okay.
Well, something I read said that possibly this was after David had given the sons of Saul to be killed because Saul had attacked these people that weren't supposed to be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how you would prove that was one way or the other.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure of which relation Shimei would be, but clearly he's got a bone to pick with David, that's for sure. And there's a very simple reason for that. Why might Shimei want to curse David? Leader.
Probably knows something about what happened in the life of David before this happens, like his relation to Bathsheba and all the things that ran out all the way to the top.
Okay, so he can identify, some evil in David, some things he doesn't, but maybe even simpler than that. Mark.
Well, David is fallen, and he sees that, and maybe he has some sort of axe to grind because of Saul's family and all that. So there's maybe some animosity there, or maybe he's just going to try and ingratiate himself to the new king that comes along.
Yeah.
But he feels emboldened because David is a very vulnerable state.
Yeah. It's easy to kick a man when he's down, that's for sure. Notice that Shimei never showed up to the palace while David was ruling there to, throw stones and to, utter these curses upon David. He waits for this opportunity when David is hurting and when David is fleeing and maybe never going to be in power again. I do think that there's some reason for him to want to curse David, this connection to Saul, thinking that David is an illegitimate king or has wronged Saul in some way. That's what he cites here, that you're reigning in the place of Saul. And what does he, remember one of the things we've mentioned in this is how people tend to invoke the name of God throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, sometimes in good ways and sometimes not. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, the one that Mark mentioned, it seems to me that he pursued Shimei.
Mm-hmm.
He must have blamed David for stealing Saul's kingship.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that David treated Saul with respect, kindness, love, and all that stuff. He never did any of that stuff. And it's interesting how some people act now. Who knows what's said between the family members?
Yeah.
But there's really, that I can see, any other reason
Right.
for that. Because you can't blame someone for something they didn't do. Unless they assume that he did do this. So I don't know if that's right. It seems odd to me that he did that. Probably could have felt that it's all David's fault. And you know what? Shimei does understand that the Lord brought David and did all this stuff over David. But he never heard anything about him giving David his kingship and giving Saul's. So I don't know.
Yeah, so I think because the narrator specifically highlights that Shimei is a man of the family of the house of Saul, that that implication is there. The other reason would be what Mark's talking about, of just the opportunity of kicking a man while he's down, especially a man who was in power, feeling emboldened there. Kathy?
Is he blaming him for Abner's death and possibly the son of Saul's, or the death of Saul's grandson?
Yeah, I think he's blaming him for everything bad that has happened to the house of Saul at this point, yes. He says, verse 8, the blood of the house of Saul. So those who have died, including Saul himself, including Saul's children, probably, yes, including Abner even, not of Saul's house, but Abner still dies at the hand of Joab, and that's easy to maybe assign to David, even though David made a point to say that this was not done at his command. But clearly this is a man who has a lot of hatred for David and believes he is responsible for everything bad that has happened to the house of Saul. He is an imposter. He has taken the kingdom from Saul and his family. And Shimei probably also is bitter because his position, being in the family of the house of the king, would have been a lot higher than it is right now. He's not going to be looked upon very well as part of with any loose connection to the previous king, for sure. But notice in verse 8 as well how he invokes the name of God here. And we've seen that happen a lot in 1st and 2nd Samuel, where people are very quick to say that God has done this or God is judging you in this matter. And we've noted that sometimes that seems pretty reasonable, and sometimes we have direct confirmation that is true. And then other times it's not, that it's just the thoughts of that man that he's now trying to bring God into. So is God responsible for these events that are happening here in these chapters with Absalom coming into power or starting this rebellion? Lisa?
I should say, God took this on. David allows that David is God's love.
Right. So, that's a little twist with this, that Shimei may not be completely wrong here, that this may be God's doing, and I think you can make an argument that this is God's doing and a punishment upon David. But is it a punishment upon David for the blood of the house of Saul? No, it really isn't. David has no guilt in that. We made a big point to show that all the ways that David was removed from that conflict, that he did not seek Saul's harm, that he was not happy when Saul's killer came and said, "Look, I've killed Saul and I've killed his sons." At least.
We gotta be careful even for ourselves. Shimei was taking his condition in life and pushing outward to everything and everybody else.
Yeah.
This is, probably somebody who simmered in, his loss, as Mike said, his lost position.
Yeah.
And instead of looking to better himself, he takes the opportunity here to, I think it's called Schadenfreude, I think. where you,
Yeah.
Rejoice in somebody else's misery.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing here. It can kind of be easy to fall into that kind of situation if you're not making your own situation better.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of this too, that he's bitter, he's angry, and it's easy then to just let that overflow. So I think there's a lesson here that we, like we've noted before, we need to be careful about invoking God's name and saying that for certain God is doing this, or this has happened, by the hand of God, or God is trying to teach us this very specific thing. We need to probably be more cautious than that, because God is still very much active and very much still doing things in the world, but it's not always so easy for us to say definitively that God is responsible for this thing or that thing, or what his reasons are for doing this. In this case, I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that God is punishing David for his sin with Bathsheba, for his lack of action with Amnon, and then lack of action with Absalom, and these are the consequences of his actions. But it's certainly not because of the blood of the house of Saul. There's no guilt there for that. And so Shimei's got a little bit of, main character syndrome, if you want to call it that, where he thinks that everything that's happening is revolving around his life, his problem, and as far as he can see, the worst thing that's ever happened is the decline of Saul and the rise of David. But there are more things going on, and we need to have enough respect for God to know that and to be more cautious before invoking God's name. Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I was actually going to say that.
Okay.
But one thing that's important when you think like that, I believe it's a very dangerous place to be, because the ruin that was brought on Saul is Saul's fault. And what happens every time that I can see, and you pointed out how wrong, God tells you when he's going to destroy a nation or any of that. He tells you, taking you out of them, it's not up to us to decide. See, it's God did that to you. God blesses us and he curses us, for individual things. But this is I believe it's a wholly different thing. This is a whole kingdom thing. And it just, this guy was kind of using God to justify his hatred for David.
Yeah.
And we were discussed why.
Right.
I think he was cheated us.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. Joseph?
Throughout the scriptures, we can see God allow evil men to go about their ways,
Yeah.
using it to bring about his own purposes. In chapter 19, remember, David refused to take vengeance or to, to take action against Shimei
Yeah.
because of his own heart, because of God's respect
Yeah.
for David.
Yeah.
Was the fact that he was a king, that he would rule with justice, and so he let Shimei slide.
Yeah. Right. So we do see God allowing evil men to do what evil men do, and that sometimes even those actions lead to better purposes, and God is able to use for good. I mean, the classic and probably largest example is Judas betraying Jesus, right? That is definitively not a good thing to do. It was very sinful for him to do, and he was eaten up with guilt about it afterwards and ended his own life. But God used that for good in Jesus, being able to be killed and to be a sacrifice for us. So, yeah, we need to just mostly be cautious. One of the ones that I heard a lot, you probably heard a lot as well, in the last few years, just, where did COVID come from? Was COVID from God as a judgment against the sins of the world? I don't know, maybe. Was COVID from Satan as a temptation and plague to bring to harm the church? I don't know, maybe. Was COVID just one of those things that happens in the natural processes of this world, that we know that there are mutations and there are things that happen with viruses? Maybe. You can't speak definitively on any of that. And you can certainly identify the effects of something like that. We know that COVID and the lockdowns and the turmoil around it has been a test upon the church. We know that it has been something that has brought a lot of turmoil to the world in different ways. But it would do us well to be cautious on that or anything like that. People did it with Hurricane Katrina. It's a punishment upon New Orleans for Mardi Gras. Like, I don't know. Okay, hurricanes happen, and God can use a natural event as a punishment, and he very well may do that, but we really just can't definitively say on anything like that. Okay, you had your hand up earlier.
I was just gonna say, Shemaiah was really, endangering himself because David was surrounded by his mighty men.
Yeah,
And Abishai wanted to kill these guys.
right.
So he was really dangerous.
Yes, he was, which I think shows his lack of control here and the fact that he is kind of being overwhelmed by his bitterness and anger. Mark?
Yeah, my exact thought was, he had no regard for his own life when he did this. And you see Benjamin is kind of a rogue sort of tribe anyway throughout the scriptures.
Mhm.
And just as an aside, this is really maybe just nothing. But we see Saul, who was God's first choice for king, being put aside in the Old Testament. And then the New Testament, we see a guy named Saul of Benjamin as well,
Yeah.
delivering the gospel.
Mhm.
So it's kind of, for me, it's kind of this reconciliation story that we see throughout the New Testament that we don't see in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Shimei or Shimei, both of those are correct as far as I could tell. So, whatever on those. Yeah, he is endangering his life here. And Abishai says, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? This is verse 9. Let me go over and take off his head. I mean, a little bit of a hothead maybe, but no, maybe not, because he's defending the honor of his king, and that's, maybe a very righteous and good thing for him to do. This man is speaking in a very evil and dishonorable way towards the king of Israel, and even though David's status as king is maybe in question, the people loyal to him are going to continue to treat him as king and to follow him as the true king of Israel. And so you cannot just speak like that to the king, and that could be worthy of death. Lisa?
Invokes the sons of thunder and ones that bring fire down on the whole city.
Yeah.
Jesus had to tell them to calm down.
Yeah.
Things will go the way they're supposed to go, but it's kind of interesting, the first thing. And it should be the response that they have.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily saying sons of thunder that they should bring fire down the whole town, but David's mighty men, that should be there.
Right, yeah. And it's a very natural thing for Abishai to do, and I don't want to imply that he's wrong for doing that or anything. But David's response then actually is pretty interesting, because what does David say about that? Lisa was alluding to it earlier. Dave.
It's just quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, he says, don't hurt him. He's not, basically, he's not a real problem. The problem is his son.
Yeah.
God would allow that, or not allow that, he knows to come to pass.
Yeah.
This guy can't do anything more than absolute. So this is the heart of David. He's still thinking about God.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, don't hurt him. This, God will allow it or he won't. And then this implication here, extending what he said before, when he sent the Ark of the Covenant back. Remember when he sent the Ark of the Covenant back, he's saying, if God still finds favor in me, then I will come back to it. God will bring me back to the Ark. I'm not going to let the Ark be this talisman for me or anything like that. But here he is leaving open, like Lisa was talking about, this possibility that this is God's punishment and that maybe this is what he deserves. So don't kill Shimei. If he's right, if God is punishing me, then it probably won't be him that kills me. It'll probably be Absalom or somebody fighting for Absalom. But maybe that's what God has in store for me, and if that's the case, then I accept the judgment. This is kind of a low moment for David.
But still, this is like David, the man after God's heart, because he's allowing for whatever the will of God is, even at this time, instead of striking back at his son, instead of striking back at Shimei, he's leaving all this to God and to God's judgment.
Yeah. Right. He is not in total despair where he's just waited there for Absalom to come kill him. You know, if he had no will to live anymore, then that's what he would do, or he, maybe would kill himself even. He's still making moves. He's still, fleeing. He's still making some preparations. He sent Zadok and Abiathar and Hushai back to Jerusalem. So there's still, opening up the possibility of a turnaround here, but he also is recognizing that God's going to do what God's going to do, and if he sees fit to punish me, I'm not going to be able to stop that. Betty?
Well, I saw it totally different than everyone else.
Okay.
I saw him mention his son. I felt like he wanted them to have sympathy for this person and later on to have sympathy for Absalom. So, I don't know, but maybe I'm just in the mother right now. But, he really wanted him killed and he really wanted his son to be killed.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can support that feeling, even if David, whether he's saying that here or not, you can support that feeling based on how he deals with Absalom later, that he doesn't really want Absalom killed, and that does fit into David's character. He's not really interested in a trail of blood throughout, everyone who is opposing him. He has really tried to limit the killing. And that's also one of the reasons why he left Jerusalem. So there's not going to be this big staged battle, there and result in the deaths of many people on both sides. So, Dave, you had your hand up?
Yeah, interesting thing about David here is when he tells him not to do anything to him, what would it have changed?
Yeah.
Kill this guy.
It doesn't solve the problem.
They said before Absalom was really wrong.
Yeah.
But actually, God was causing the problem.
Yeah.
It just took his time. And David says something pretty good. I mean, he goes, the Lord will come on affliction, and the Lord will repay me with good for his cursings.
Yeah.
And this guy goes along afterwards, cursing from the rocks.
Yeah.
Look like a crazy person, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what good would it have done to kill the guy?
Yeah.
Cut his head off like a dog.
It doesn't even make the first page of a list of problems that David has right now. So, yeah. Right. That's a good point there. Later.
I think David is still trying to portray the same character that we had before the time when he was with Saul, like no retaliation,
Yeah.
or not doing the things that he should have done in taking back his relation with Saul. Unfortunately, because of his, probably God had said, Jonathan and
Yeah.
everybody there is trying to, and I think it's one character that probably we should have.
Yeah.
And, you can tell anybody that, you can't be saved because you're not believing right now.
Yeah.
But you still, what we can do is just to tell the good news, and that's it.
Yeah. And let's acknowledge something right here, that David, as much of a man of war as he's been, and as many battles as he's fought, he has not grown desensitized to what it means to kill someone, or for there to be bloodshed, which is easier said than done. He's still, sometimes these warlords, these generals who have seen all of this combat, it doesn't mean anything to them anymore. And so when somebody now speaks against them, well, it's a simple thing to have them killed. David never considers it a simple thing to have someone killed. That is sometimes the proper punishment, and as king, he has to execute that judgment. But it's never a simple thing, and that's a good thing. Jesse.
We must remember that David always had a connection with God.
Yeah.
Excuse me, even when he sinned with Bathsheba,
Yeah.
Psalm 51. And many of the Psalms, especially the record Psalms, David pours out his heart and he acknowledges that God is in control.
Yes.
And just like we said, he wasn't actually going out looking for blood,
Right.
but that was, he recognized he was a king.
Yeah.
And we don't know what other communication God had with David through the Spirit.
Right.
So God perhaps was communicating with David.
Yeah.
All the while he was facing the danger.
Right.
Sometimes we have occasions when David actually prayed to God. And remember when they had come and apprehended, David was on the run and they apprehended David.
Mhm.
They took all this stuff and of course David asked the Lord. You know, they wanted to kill David.
Yeah.
But David asked the Lord, should we go after him? The Lord said yes. And so David had constant communication with God. I think that's a lesson for us to learn also.
Yeah.
That when things seem bleak or we at the worst, recognize the fact that God is always in control.
Yeah. And it's, I think, the very best thing about David, because he doesn't always make good decisions. He has, weak moments and low moments, but because he has this constant communication with God, because he is constantly thinking about what it is that God wants and submitting to God's will, he keeps coming back to God, and he's able to rely on him. And the Psalms really flesh that out for us, for sure. A lot of the events that we see here, we have Psalms that are paired with them, and then Psalms for other events that aren't mentioned in these historical books either. And it paints an impressive picture, for sure. Okay, Gary.
To know God is always in control is such a place of strength.
Yeah.
Like it's been stated, we may not know how or when or why, but we still believe that he is in control. Because the opposite of that would say, wow, things are going so bad, God is not in control.
And,
that's,
yeah.
not the truth.
Right. And it's one of those things that is a lot easier to say than it is to actually live and to believe, especially when there's chaos around us, especially when we are off kilter. But that's exactly when our faith needs to be the strongest. Okay, so then David and all the people who are with him arrive at the Jordan River, but they're exhausted. They've left in a hurry, and they're kind of taking a break. But we see that they left just in time. It's good that they left this quickly, because Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And so you get the impression that it's, David and his men have left, and just as they're beyond the outskirts, Absalom and his men are coming in. It's a very quick thing, and they didn't have lots of time to be dilly-dallying and figuring out what they were going to do. So here we see Hushai, the Archite, who had gone to David and wanted to be with David. David sent back. Now he is there with Absalom, and this is a little bit of an awkward situation. So how does he navigate his position there in Jerusalem? Gary.
He was more useful to David as a spy, right?
Yeah. And so how is he going to actually accomplish that here? Because he's in Jerusalem and Absalom has arrived. This is probably a bad time to say, long live David, the true king of Israel. Lisa. Yeah. So he's going to feign loyalty to Absalom and try to make it clear that he's here to serve Absalom. and that David is long gone. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Of course, we know that this is a scheme, and he's going to use this as an opportunity to try to help David while pretending to help Absalom. And so it's a very dangerous position for him to be in. It's probably also dangerous to be with David, but this isn't better. It might be worse in a lot of ways, and could put him in a lot of harm's way.
They trusted to put him in a situation.
Yeah. Because he could have flipped very easily, and that would have made his life easier in a lot of ways to just, legitimately serve Absalom. Absalom's there in Jerusalem. He could just take power, and, David's not going to rule anymore. So what is Ahithophel's first advice for Absalom in Jerusalem? Yeah, Lisa.
Well, one of the things that you would do if you were taking over a kingdom is you took the king's wife, in this case his concubine, the wife right there, and do that as a very public thing to completely, what he's doing here is completely cutting himself off from his father
Yeah.
and taking power from.
Yeah. Okay. So you've hit on the important things with that, which is good, because it might be a little bit bizarre to us if we can't understand the motivations behind this. So Ahithophel says, take your father's concubines, the 10 who were left there to manage the house while David left. Ahithophel says, take those 10 concubines and very publicly lie with them. Make this obvious that they are now yours, and that we kind of recoil at that for good reason. But Lisa's hit on the important parts of this. One, it's a display of power, that if David were still king and if David still had any power, he wouldn't allow this to happen. But what can David do about it? Nothing. That means Absalom is the true king. And then secondly, it totally severs any connection between David and Absalom. There's going to be no reconciliation. Nobody should be thinking of Absalom working as an agent of David in any way. They are on totally separate sides now, and as far as Absalom is concerned, he has come out on top, and that's what he wants everyone else there in Jerusalem to know as well. Now, Ahithophel was a very trusted advisor. Verse 23 tells us, now in those days the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. So what he said was going to be heard and going to be listened to because he had such wisdom and gave such good counsel. And so Absalom absolutely does this, though he probably didn't need very much convincing. Yeah, Lisa?
Well, one thing to know is that they did not go to God, they did not ask God, they didn't invoke God in any way.
Yes. So there is no consulting God in this matter. And yes, read that carefully. The counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. That means they trusted it that much, and they esteemed it that highly. It doesn't actually mean that they were consulting God. But what is the other significance of this event here? This is not just a totally random thing that's being mentioned. Leader?
I think trying to give the reason to restore back Israel, you mentioned the father, from displaying all those incidents that he should do as a king now, and just to reconcile brothers, restore back unity to Israel.
Yeah, okay. What else, though, on why this kind of shocking thing is mentioned? Lisa?
Are we talking about when it fell, not necessarily when it was concubine, but going after David? Is that what?
We'll get there. No, that's not what I, yes.
I want to go there.
Yeah, sorry, no, that's not what I'm referring to just yet, though that also it will be interesting discussion. This whole taking David's concubines, like there's something about this that we have heard of before. Gary?
David took a man's wife, he had no right to take.
Okay, so, yep, we're like halfway there. David took a man's wife that was not his, and then he did take all of Saul's wives. Yes, though Saul is dead by that point. What else connected to this sin with Bathsheba, Sue?
And then he murdered her husband.
He murdered her husband, yes, and Absalom is going to, try to murder David, absolutely. As part of the punishment to David, what did God say David's punishment was going to be? We usually specifically talk about the death of that son that came, but there was more to it. Joseph?
He didn't tell me about
Yeah, he's going to have trouble with his sons, and that certainly plays out here. And this is part of the fulfillment of that. And we've mentioned previously kind of David's loss of moral authority in some ways with his sons, that he either can't or more likely won't restrain them and punish them as he's supposed to, probably because of the guilt he feels with what happened with Bathsheba. He doesn't deal with Amnon the way that he's supposed to after the rape of Tamar. He doesn't punish Absalom after he murders Amnon. And so there's a lot of trouble there. But one of the other things from the account of David and Bathsheba is that God specifically says that your wives will be taken from you and that other men will lie with them in the sight of all. Like, you did this secretly. You did this sexual sin trying to keep it private and secret. And ultimately you failed, and God exposes this and makes it obvious. But there's going to be a punishment later where a similar type of sin is committed against him, and everyone's going to see it. It's going to be this dishonor. And this is actually a fulfillment of that David is being dishonored as his concubines have been taken from him, and everyone knows it. Dave?
Yeah, that's the thing. All of what you said is true. If somebody's already commented on this, I apologize if I can't hear.
Yeah.
Ahithophel was in it.
Sounds good to me.
This guy told Absalom to do something that was really offensive, and basically eliminated any possibility of them reconciling David and
Right.
period. Because this was in that time culture, taking the king's concubines was an act of immorality.
Yeah.
And he did it blatantly in front of everybody on top of the roof.
Yeah.
He pitches the tents on top of the roof.
Yeah.
Unless you want people to see it.
Right.
Which they did.
Yeah.
So this is like I guess, I guess, not only did he want to destroy any possible reconciliation between Absalom and David, he followed the scenes and encouraged him to want to go for it. He knew how strong he is and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It's not going to be on. So it's just really obnoxious.
Yeah.
Stick a finger in your eye and burn
Yeah.
to you. And they knew it. They did it.
Yeah. Now, as far as practical advice goes in trying to secure Absalom's power, it might have been good advice from that perspective, because There's a dangerous period of time when you've overthrown the previous king that you need to secure the loyalty of the people. You need to show that your power is supreme and that you are going to be more capable than the man who just lost his power. And so from that perspective, it might be good advice. It's not a very moral and righteous thing for him to be doing, obviously. But yeah, it's, things are moving along for Absalom. Leader?
I just have a question. The other things that are explainable that happens in the series. Do we have a verse that from the history and everything that David has find remorse in himself besides portraying the same character that he has?
That David has what? Excuse me?
David has. Do we find any remorse of what he did on his sin?
Yeah, tons. And then a lot of the Psalms help show the remorse that David has at different points. That really fleshes out the historical narrative that's given here. Some of it we just sort of move right on past the event, and we see maybe a brief mention of his repentance. But the Psalms very much flesh out his motivations and his emotions about the whole thing. So I'd recommend kind of trying to match those up. And that would be, if I ever teach 1st and 2nd Samuel again, it kind of would be interesting to do so, trying to pair the Psalms with them. And maybe you can study that yourself that way sometime. Mark?
The psalm related to this is Psalm 3, and it shows David is still relying on God.
Which Psalm?
3.
Psalm 3. Yeah, Psalm 3 is great. So yeah, look at Psalm 3 with that, and you'll see. Okay, thank you, everyone. Next week, chapter 17. It's not that long of a chapter, so maybe we'll get into 18, but we'll see. Thank you.